Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the whole problem with training to failure. And that's the fact that it's just not necessary. And when I say that, it's not opinion. It's not about my opinion. It's about what the research shows. And I implement this even with my drug-free lifters, and you guys have noticed some of my drug-free people are pretty thick and stacked. They don't train to failure. And that's the thing that we have to remember, that people will argue about this and they'll say, well, have you tried it? Well, obviously I've tried it. Obviously many people have tried it. And the fact of the matter is, there are plenty of people who have achieved extremely large amounts of hypertrophy without training to failure, without training beyond failure. The bulk of the scientific literature shows that there probably isn't any benefits to actually going to failure. Right? So what more do people want? So it's really the argument that you need to do it, or, well, that's just being lazy or whatever. So no. When you have anecdote of tons and tons of people who successfully don't go to failure and still seem to gain maximum hypertrophy, and the studies that look at it, even in more advanced lifters, find that it doesn't seem to be necessary at all. There's no real difference between stopping 2 or 3 reps short versus going to failure. In terms of muscle growth, you have no argument left, because the anecdote and the scientific literature correlate with each other. They overlap. They say the same thing. Okay? And it doesn't matter that you're like, but this bodybuilder trained to failure or beyond in force reps and he got really big. Okay. But what about the thousands of others who didn't and still got massive? Do you see the problem there? Your anecdote shows that it's not necessary. Because one person does it, or 10 people do it, and then 10 others don't do it and still get the same results. That should tell you everything. That is your anecdote in the real world. That it didn't seem to be required. It didn't matter. So then we study it in the lab and find the same thing. So the question becomes, well, why not? Well, because it beats you up. It can make you get overtrained quicker. It can create higher risks of injuries, right? We get more overuse from it. So if we're looking at it in that context, there are potential negatives. Am I saying they're automatically going to happen, or that you won't get good results? No. Saying there you're creating negatives with no benefit. And then people will then go, but what if I do it just to be sure? Be sure of what? If going to failure isn't necessary or beneficial in any way, what are you trying to be sure of? Are we getting high quality sets in? Are you getting high quality sets to where you could probably only do a couple more reps, and you're probably, if you're doing sufficient volume, you're probably getting as much growth as you can expect. You're also probably recovering easier. All right, you have that. And then we come over to, what about if you do heavy work first? Well, then we reach upper threshold muscle fibers easier. So, most of my lifters do concurrent type training, meaning we do heavy sets or speed work of some type first. Well, what happens? We're more efficient at recruiting the upper threshold fibers even further away from failure. What do we find in studies on advanced lifters? The more advanced you are, the higher your neural drive and neuromuscular efficiency, the easier you recruit the highest threshold muscle fibers, even 8 or 9 or 10 reps from failure sometimes. Okay? In other words, you take your 12 rep max and you do 5 sets of 10 with it. If you're an advanced lifter, you may be hitting the upper threshold fibers within the first few reps on every set. Okay. Now, people say, but if you're doing some of that, you might need a little more volume. Well, more advanced lifters need more volume. Novices grow on anything. And this is something we do find with more advanced lifters. That's the problem when people say, well, what's the minimum volume to gain muscle? Well, I don't know. How advanced are you? Okay. If I have a lifter who's been training for 6 years, they can bench over 300, squat over 400, deadlift over 500. How much volume do they need to stimulate hypertrophy versus someone who's been lifting for 6 months? They need a hell of a lot more volume to disrupt homeostasis. The volumes that might make a novice grow like a weed might be maintenance volumes for them. It'll just help them keep what they have. And I'm not saying anyone can't grow all 5 really hard sets. You probably can. Some really advanced lifters might not. Might not. And I didn't say they wouldn't. So here's our problem. People want to be sure. They say something like, well, I need to be sure I'm stimulating muscle growth. Well, then that's going to be done on how much quality volume you're doing. You might want to be looking there. You might want to be looking there for your answers, because you're going to have a minimum volume threshold. You're going to have a minimum volume threshold to gain muscle. Maybe you need to be making sure on that end. And that's also probably going to mean staying a rep or two away from failure so that you can get the quality volume in. All right? This is where hypertrophy happens. It's where hypertrophy happens. And we can do it this way without beating ourselves up. You know, people say silly stuff. Well, it just sounds lazy. Okay, well, do you care about doing something that someone else out there thinks is lazy? Or do you care about hitting big ass numbers and getting really jacked? Like, which is more important to you? I would rather be viewed as lazy and squat 600 pounds and look like a tank. Me personally, that's what I would rather do. I would rather be winning. I would rather be getting gold medals. I would rather be breaking records, which requires us to maximize hypertrophy. I would rather do that and have people think I'm lazy because of some weird bodybuilder standard they have from that world. I would rather have that and be putting up elite numbers and be jacked. I would rather do that and be seen as lazy. Pick one. You know, it's like people will say, well, I do this because it's more enjoyable. Well, if it's interfering with your goals, then you're choosing that enjoyment over actually getting your goals. Okay? But here's the thing. The people who train to failure all the time are the people who train beyond failure, who do force reps. They're the ones who are the most injured. There's no muscle growth benefit to it. They're not getting bigger from it. They are getting more beat up. They are getting more overuse. That's something to be concerned about. It's absolutely something to be concerned about. Again, we should be seeking maximizing our results while minimizing our injuries. Okay. And in this case, both the real-world anecdote and the scientific literature are pretty much telling you the same things. You don't need to train to failure. It's not even really a benefit. You just need high-quality sets. High-quality sets reaching and fatiguing upper threshold fibers with sufficient training volume. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.